This is what my adult life has come to. Finishing an AA project on YouTube. Welcome to 2021. Anyway, hi, I'm Elijah, and this is going to be my final project for my English literature class, Romance to Modernism. And yeah, it's going to be a full ramble. That's not true. I actually wrote out a lot of the details and I'm kind of reading it. Just full transparency. So how am I going to ramble? I'm going to talk about Alan Moore and his views through the stories he's written. I'll be focusing on 4 stories in particular. The first one being V for Vendetta. Second being Watchmen. Third, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And the fourth being Promethea. And we'll be following the themes in order as the previous list of anarchy, deconstruction, redefining the past, and the magical future. First of all, the concept of death of the author doesn't apply to the works of Alan Moore. Death of the author is, in very, very layman's terms, is when an individual's work goes past the author. So, for example, when you read the work of H.G. Wells, you don't think of what H.G. Wells went through in order to define his work. Whereas if you go through, look at I don't know, the horrible person that is J.K. Rowling, you can very clearly see her her political leanings and how she feels about minority groups, especially in her works. And so Alan Moore is definitely very transparent about his work being a direct product of his beliefs. We'll get into that. It's pretty interesting and it's kind of wild. Also, I want to find that yes, Alan Moore is one of the greatest comic writers of all time. Specifically, one of the greatest English comic writers of all time, including Neil Gaiman. I see you, my king. Bless him. Manga has its own rich history of its own. And also much of the American comic industry is going to be left out, especially Marvel. Alan Moore did some work with Marvel, but that's not what he's known for. There is stuff with DC, and that's real juicy. So it'll be there. Trust. Also, I know you all are asking, just desperate, wanting to know, isn't Alan Moore the poster child for postmodernism? I know that's the forefront. I know that's what you're thinking of. And in short, yes. Yes, he is. But I do think, to defend my whole process, my teacher's cringing right now, I can tell, because she's like, oh my god, I asked about modernism. And you know what? It's okay. Trust me. There's going to be a lot of referencing and relying on themes from the past in order for his works to resonate through the decades. Especially in the context of his work being literature, which, considering he is a comic book writer, is pretty bizarre. I'm pretty sure none of the romantics, Victorian, and modernist writers ever thought of you know what? Comics, that's where it's at. That's going to be the next medium that we're going to inhabit. But lo and behold, here we are. I also want to define literature, in case y'all hating and considering that and think that comics are not literature. Merriam-Webster defines literature as literature, as people in the Crown would say. Writings having excellence of form or expression, expressing ideas of permanent or universal interest. And if you are even remotely on about in pop culture today, it is extremely clear that Alan Moore's work really resonates with people and is going to for quite a long time. And it has for quite a long time. And I think in a lot of ways we wish it didn't. Especially when we get into V for Vendetta, is a little too telling. And especially with Watchmen and the HBO remake, oof. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here, guys. It's pretty nuts. So for my personal section, why Alan Moore? Why did I pick this as my author to review? Well, I was introduced first to the films of Alan Moore before the comics. I think the first one I watched was V for Vendetta, and I remember being 10 and being kind of traumatized by it. And I was already very much a young environmentalist person of we're killing the planet, yada yada yada. And then I watched that and I was like, oh my god, this is really intense. But truly, I didn't actually dig into Alan Moore's work until I started watching HBO's run of Watchmen, in which I was really confused because all I saw was the movie. So when I saw Rorschach everywhere in a white supremacist setting. I was so confused. I was like, why is this? And then who's Jean Smart? Good for her for getting the role. But why is she here? And then I decided to stop watching the show because I was just confused. And as much as I love Regina King, I was just lost, dude. Like, you don't even know. And I bought Watchmen. And this book sent me spiraling, y'all. And it's so good. Like, oh my god, it's fantastic. Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore, they did that, and that really redefined a lot of what I thought about Alan Moore's work and the works that he's done and the interpretations of his work. So then, ever since then, since I finished the Watchmen HBO show, which we'll touch on a little bit, since it's not Alan Moore's, like, not really talking about it, like, it'll mostly be my thoughts on it. And so ever since then, I've been doing my best to, like, dig through Alan Moore's work, which is, like, decades long. It is nuts how much that dude did and how much of an influence he's had on everything, even relating to, like, the superhero stuff that we watch today. It's crazy, y'all. All right. And as a writer, I admire his ability to make everything feel really real in dialogue. How blatantly, I really misread that. How to blatantly relay dark and powerful themes that are expressed in literature, but not in the way that he does it, which I guess is postmodern. I'm going to realize now that this 10-minute, I thought this was going to be a 10-minute video, and it's going to be a little bit longer, but I really like this content, so get ready, y'all. Also, this image back here is not like the picture from Watchmen. Alan Moore is a really unique guy. If you're going to take away anything from this whole thing, it's probably going to be that. The dude wrote a comic to end the world. One of my favorite interviews that I found is he's, like, taking an interviewer into this dark, dank cave, like, crypt type thing. They filmed V for Vendetta, and he subsequently just trashes V for Vendetta. It's hilarious. It's mostly talking about, like, Northampton, his hometown. Y'all, it's on YouTube. I'll link it. I'll link all my sources. It's pretty hilarious. He claimed that at 17, he was one of the world's most inept LSD dealers. Like, that dude was on it. And you can tell. He was in a polyamorous relationship, which to me mirrored the creators of the Wonder Woman comic. If you have not seen Dr. Marston and the Wonder Women, I think it's called. I don't remember. But it's related to that. Rebecca Hall is in it. And Luke Adams is in it. Fantastic. Great movie. Good comic movie, too. Oof. Yeah, and he's a magician. Alan Moore is. Like, not like a rabbit out of the hat, like a full-on, like, I can transcend dimensions magician. So while we get into all that, we're going to first look at Moore's work from V for Vendetta, published by Vertigo Comics from 1982 to 1986. And Vertigo, by the way, is a DC-owned property, which we'll also get into that. There's a lot to get into, as you can tell. So V for Vendetta is about an anarchist named V who fights against a fascist government in an alternate United Kingdom. You're actually all probably very familiar with this character, especially as of late. The Guy Fawkes mask has become a modern metaphor of rebellion, and I'll put a picture up right now. Other works, Alan Moore is really direct on his view of anarchy. I kid you not, having to dig through finding the interviews for this guy is nuts. He does not interview. And I was, like, in the Wayback Machine, like, looking at anarchist blogs where Alan Moore's being interviewed. So in an anarchist blog, Strangers in a Tangled Wilderness, Moore states really bluntly, anarchy is in fact the only political position that is actually possible. It's also important to note that while Alan Moore actively puts his beliefs on paper, his goal is to introduce ideas for people to think over. He also says, I didn't want to tell people what to think. I didn't want to tell people what to think. I just wanted to tell people to think and consider some of these admittedly extreme little elements would nevertheless do recur regularly throughout human history. While the ideas of fascism don't really show up in romantic or Victorian literature, as far as I know, I haven't read it all, but modernist ideas are ample in V for Vendetta, including the work of George Orwell's 1984, which is a very clear influence on the novel. The idea of a big brother has kind of turned into the head, where different aspects of government are defined, are kind of like, how to phrase it? Different aspects of government are taking over. So there's like the eye, which is surveillance, the nose, which is like the police force, the ears, more surveillance. It's a lot of surveillance in a totalitarian government. MLB for Vendetta is very clearly defined as a work on, as by anarchism in the face of fascism. This is the only one of Moore's works that's probably pretty cut and dry on what the themes are. And on one hand, like, and to talk about the movie, because we have to, I do like the movie. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's not a bad interpretation of it. However, there are a lot of themes that, let's say the comic goes a lot harder on the anarchist themes than the movie does, where the movie's kind of more like, we can do better. The other one's like, you know what? Blow that shit up. We're done. Like we're and fair. Like, it's crazy. It's kind of weird. This is also a side note that there's a lot of BBC interviews who gladly gloss over V for Vendetta, which I find really funny. Okay. So, and I mentioned a little bit about it earlier, but after V for Vendetta and kind of during and before Watchmen, Moore did a lot of work for DC. His biggest three titles being the horror comic Swamp Thing, which revived the character, which is Swamp Thing. Hello, he's pretty cool. And the pantheon of darker DC heroes, like my personal favorite bisexual hero, John Constantine. John Constantine and King Shark, y'all. If you aren't watching the DCU animated movies, you're missing out. They're pretty bomb, especially the Constantine ones. He even took full on wrote a Superman comic, which is, if you can imagine, not an easy feat. But he did one called The Man Who Has Everything, which was later turned into a Justice League episode, which I vividly remember as a child, where Superman imagines his life back on Krypton and what he wants his life to be. And oh, chef's kiss, masterpiece. It's so good. And he also, for all the bros out there, for all the dudes, he also created what many consider to be the definitive story of the Joker through The Killing Joke, which, if you have not heard of The Killing Joke, either just not a big fan of DC, or y'all really need to get in on the DC. Okay, like, y'all hate on it. Everyone's like, Marvel, yay, but look, I'm a Marvel fan, trust, I love X-Men, that's like my go-to. However, I do think DC has a lot more richer and complex stories than Marvel sometimes does. So, okay, back to The Killing Joke. And Moore himself is not a fan of the comic, but you can't, because he just says there isn't enough themes that he doesn't explore a lot. It's just about essentially comparing Batman and the Joker and how they're pretty much the same. But there is absolutely clear of how much influence his work has. From the Batman Arkham games, where, like, it's literally just all the events after The Killing Joke. And my Best Picture nominee for last year, Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Imagination of Harley Quinn. Birds of Prey was a product of the events of The Killing Joke, where Barbara Gordon, despite her not being in Birds of Prey movie, becomes Oracle because of the Joker, and she creates the Birds of Prey, which, come on, best DC movie. And also from this point, and DC and Moore are rivals. They got beef. It's crazy. And he and DC are in a very tense relationship. There's a whole other spectrum of it that I couldn't even cover. But the gist of it is that DC pretty much owns all of Moore's work. Like, you can even see on my thing, DC. And so, including V for Vendetta and a few other ones. So, we're not going to get into that because it's just too much. And we're talking about literature here, okay? Alright, so now we're going to Watchmen. Dave Gibbons, the guy who did the art for Watchmen, says that, y'all have seen the image of the smiley face with a splatter of blood on it. That's kind of the iconic Watchmen logo. Other than the cast of characters, it's it. Like, when you see that, you're thinking, oh, this is going to be a Watchmen thing. And Dave Gibbons, the guy who drew that image, calls it a cartoon image with the reality splashed across it, which is actually a really good metaphor for Watchmen as a whole. So despite Also, I have just preference. I have a lot of feelings about the movie, and if you know me in real life, it's crazy. Like, I will rant on it regularly. So you're gonna get a lot of bashing on the film for this. Yeah. So despite what Zack Snyder may think, Watchmen is not about idolatry towards superheroes. In fact, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were sure to clarify over and over again, every interview I tell you, it's crazy, is that it is a love letter to the superhero genre. He is realistic about how they would actually be like. Like, seriously, watch any interview, and Alan Moore will pretty much say, Rorschach isn't a fascist. He's just insane. Which I think is hilarious, I'm not gonna lie. And we'll talk about Rorschach in a bit because he's his own beast. So at this phase in Alan Moore's career, everything was about stripping away the excess and getting to the human, gritty bits of storytelling. So especially like in Swamp Thing, that was a major theme. Superman, another major theme. All of the stuff he's working in this era. Even Joker, like, it's explained where he comes from at the human level. But also making these characters kind of immortal. It's pretty wild. Like, and I think that's one of the big things that makes this like a real lasting piece, is that the works and the themes and the characters of Watchmen are so present in our everyday culture because we have to live in the world we live in today. And we'll get into the themes of Watchmen because, my God. So at the end of the day, Alan Moore tries to write a good story. And as we have seen with V for Vendetta, that means a lot of societal and cultural analysis. So Watchmen follows a semi-retired team of superheroes who are living at the height of a Cold War-like era. Nuclear war is pretty much imminent. It's gonna happen. And there's a whole doomsday clock clicking throughout the comic. And someone's out there killing superheroes. And also being a masked vigilante, which is what superheroes are called in the world of Watchmen, has been made illegal by the state. Excuse me. So Moore explores... This is getting wild. Moore explores the themes of power, control, how money influences power, insanity, imperialism, fascism, nostalgia, the cost of human life, the cost of what something actually is that you believe, what's the price of doing something you believe, defining, honestly, it's just so much. And that's just like what I wrote down. Like, there's so much more that the comic is about. And trust me, like, if you read Watchmen, you'll see there's a whole sections that I haven't even touched on. Like, the nature of time. Yeah, it's fantastic. So after, also as a note, personal note, after you read the Watchmen comic, watch the HBO show after, because Moore Chris pretends it doesn't exist. He doesn't like it, but it's fantastic. It's so good. And Regina the King, as Princess Week said, fantastic. It's just a really good follow up that really follows in the Alan Moore legacy of saying screw you and moving on and doing what they're gonna do. So despite the success of Watchmen and its pretty much universal acclaim, Moore thinks the comic failed as literature, knowing the character of Rorschach's popularity as the cause. And in my opinion, I do see what he means. I don't think Watchmen has failed as literature, because reading it in through a critical thinking literary lens, you're like, oh, this is excellent, this is it. But I can definitely see how, like, the shifting of Rorschach's character in the public conscious from psychopath to the misunderstood rebel absolutely messes with the meaning behind the comic. It's like reading Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad and thinking Kurtz was the good guy with unorthodox means of achieving his goals, which is not the point at all. And please don't take this out of context and say that I'm saying that Kurtz is the good guy in Heart of Darkness. No one's the good guy of Heart of Darkness. Please, like, come on. It's the same with Rorschach. Rorschach is not a good guy. That is why his followers are all white supremacist, crazy people in the show. Truthfully, this whole thing could have been about Watchmen. But I also have to tie in modernist and Victorian literature at some point. And unfortunately, partway through this whole thing, I did not totally realize that Moore is really good at postmodernism. So this is where my literature teacher can finally breathe. I am going to talk about Victorian literature, but mainly an ensemble of Victorian adventurers. And I'd be amiss not to start off with the cast of illustrious characters. So we got Mina from Wilhelmina, as they say. I don't know how they say it. From Bram Stoker's Dracula. Alan Quatermain from H. Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mines, Captain Nemo from 2000 Leagues Under the Sea by H.G. Wells. Well, reread in class, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, primarily Mr. Hyde from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. The Invisible Man from, you guessed it, The Invisible Man by, you guessed it, H.G. Wells. And the one modernist character in this whole thing is Orlando from Virginia Woolf's Orlando, who's an immortal dude person, I should say, that shape shifts it between men and women throughout history, which, like, ahead of the time, yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So think of League as, I should call it League because Justice League exists. I'll call it Extraordinary. Think of Extraordinary as the Avengers or Justice League of literary characters. The hallmark things of anarchy and deconstruction are still relevant in Extraordinary, but this time Moore strives to talk more about popular imagination. So in other words, like pop culture imagination. So out of all of Moore's works, League is definitely like the sophisticated middle child. Like there's a lot of instances where you really actually kind of have to understand Victorian literature and where they're coming from and what they're talking about in order to really appreciate the story behind it. And redefining familiar figures of literature, he has shown his familiarity and the value of literature, in which he even states, the plan of imagination is as old as we are. It has been humanity's constant companion with all of its fictional locations, like Mount Olympus and the gods. And since we first came down from the trees, basically, it seems very important, otherwise we wouldn't have it. And it's incredibly clear that Moore values literature and still sees it as a valuable well of inspiration to draw from. Don't watch the movie for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It's not it. Like, it is a very, just film-wise, it's not good, but also narrative-wise, it's a whole mess. Definitely focus, like, read the comic, and also read the works behind the comic, so you can see where he's drawing from, because a lot of the themes really, it's almost like a progression of how the themes that already exist in the stories continue. So, like, for example, and this is quoted in, if you YouTube Alan Moore on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, he talked about each of the characters, especially Mr. Hyde, where he claims that Mr. Hyde is a more noble person than Dr. Jekyll, because Dr. Jekyll had malintentions for separating himself, the evil, from himself. Mr. Hyde is like the only one that's like, yeah, this is it. I'm real. This is it. I want some tea really quick for my literature mug. Also, a good work for comparison is that shares the idea of it, and is a good way to get introduced into like kind of understanding this type of literature and pop culture, would be the initial run of Showtime's Penny Dreadful, which follows a similar idea of using literary characters but in the horror aspect. So instead of like Alan Quatermain and all them, they have more romantic characters. So they have Frankenstein, they have Dorian Gray, which technically is a Victorian character. There's a lot of people in there, but he's immortal, so I guess he was romantic at one point. And so it's definitely in a horror sphere more than the adventure romp that is League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Also, I love Penny Dreadful. It's so good. I love it. I haven't finished the LA one, but I kind of have mixed feelings about it. I did debate on doing a whole video on that as well. Not for my final, just in life. So Moore would again turn to the literary inspirations after League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Actually, kind of during, when him and his wife wrote the comic, sensual comic, that, you know, it's the P word, not WAP, the other one. It is called Lost Girls, where it details the sensual exploits. I don't know what I can and can't say on YouTube, okay? I'm just going to say sensual, and I'll hope context clues gets there. The sensual exploits of Alice from Alice in Wonderland, Wendy from Peter Pan, and Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, who are adults, as adults sharing their experiences. He also has one of his more acclaimed comics, From Hell, which takes place in the late Victorian era, focusing on the investigation of Jack the Ripper. And more recently, he has released comics based off the works of H.P. Lovecraft, a controversial racist writer of the modern era, who's more often interesting. His work is a lot more relevant today than it was when he was around. But the peak of Mooreism, if y'all thought this was weird, he also wrote this next one where he literally was like, I'm going to end the world. And when I say there is no way to fully explain Promethea within my limited time frame to get this video by the deadline, which we have long since passed, know that I am not joking. I had to dig in, y'all. I had to go down a deep well of reading about magic, the nature of reality, time, Kabbalah, the tree of life, and how the comic reflects the universe as a whole. It's too much. Truthfully, I had a hard time even trying to figure out how to write this section, but it is important that to talk about it. So I've not read Promethea. I'll be very upfront, but these are key components to understanding Alan Moore's concepts. So for context, Promethea follows a magical entity of the same name who ascends through the levels of reality as per the concepts of Kabbalah. So why do I bring this one up in the light of the more grounded works before it? Like, there's very clear, like, oh, anarchy, deconstruction, literature, and then there's reality shifting. Why? And let me tell you. Because Alan Moore is a self-proclaimed ceremonial magician with the goal of expanding humanity's consciousness. And this is something he's been doing in all the works we've talked about so far. Like, I'm pretty sure none of, at least for me, I can speak to myself, I had never thought of Anarchy until V for Vendetta. I hadn't thought of what would Batman actually be like without Watchmen? Or what would literary characters do today if not for... Well, truthfully, I actually went through Penny Dreadful before League, but League helped. So Promethea and us have the same, and humanity has the same goal according to Alan Moore. And this is where it gets real weird. We need to accept both the world of the imaginary, which is just as real as our own physical world, as equal, which in turn would end the world as we know and usher in a new age of living, because all of our consciousness would shift into accepting this dual reality. And he is quoted it's alleged that he says that's going to happen in 2017 within the Promethea comics, but I haven't actually found like the quote. It's just been brought up a few times in different pieces, and it's very implied in Promethea from what I understand. And I've not read, there's 32 issues of it, so if you can imagine, I did not have time in 2 weeks to read 32 issues of a comic book. I wish I had time, but I gotta make money. As I said before, Alan Moore is a strange guy who has had an incredible impact on literature, and the regular usage of past and pre-existing Victorian and modern themes display a mastery of his craft in a very unconventional medium. And Moore had pushed the boundaries of literature into places where his predecessors would have never thought of. And despite the often misinterpreted and misappropriation of his work, he remains a steadfast figure in British literature. Before we're done, I want to leave you with a quote from Alan Moore regarding magic. And this does actually tie in with literature, which is pretty cool. There's some confusion as to what magic actually is. I think this can be cleared up if you look at the very earliest description of magic. Magic in its earliest form is often referred to as the art. I believe this is completely literal. I believe that magic is art, and that art, whether it be writing, music, sculpture, or any other form, is literally magic. Indeed, to cast a spell is simply to spell, and to manipulate words to change people's consciousness. And I believe that is why an artist or a writer is the closest thing in the contemporary world you're likely to be a shaman. And if we were to take this to its core, and this is the case, at the end of the day, Moore is totally correct about this, then everything we've read, especially in this class, but from Romantic, Victorian, and Gothic literature, for me, Gothic, I love Gothic literature, Romantic, Victorian, and modern literature, at the end of the day, everything we've read has shaped our worldview is at the work of magicians. And maybe in reading literature, not just modern with Alan Moore, but even its predecessors, we are actively reading spell books of anarchy and destruction, and maybe we'll become better for it. And thank you. That's the end of this video.